Hi, this is Nancy with Seeking Truth Always, and I'm here to share with you a brief video in case you might be a little bit confused or a lot confused about what's going on. What is the explanation? What is the end game? What is President Trump doing? Well, he's doing what he promised he would do. But sometimes in the fog of war, in this war called the war of good versus evil, you guys know that follow me, that's what I've called it from the beginning, over almost 5 years ago, when God called me to start doing podcasts. It's just what he put in my spirit, this war of good versus evil. And you know, when you look at it, that's exactly what it is. Well, I'm going to share with you information tonight, not information that I wrote, but information that I came across from a very gifted writer and knowledgeable content creator, I will say, in Substack and X. You can find him. His account is called Applelamps, just like it sounds, Applelamps. And this article he wrote is explaining what he's called and others have called the Trump Doctrine. The Trump Doctrine. And you're going to find, after listening to this article, you're going to understand how Venezuela, Iran, and Cuba are all connected. You're going to understand exactly what President Trump is doing. My job is just delivering the information to you. Many thanks and all credit to Applelamps for creating the document, the article, that now we can all learn from and share with others to help them learn too. And that's what I'm doing in this video. The Trump Doctrine is not the opening act. It's literally the final destination. And the good news is we are almost there. So, with that being said, I'm going to get started in this article. Sit down, relax, wherever you're listening to this, listen and absorb, because you will understand this better than you could ever imagine you could have understood what's going on, what President Trump is doing, how and why. So he begins the article by saying, I'm not asking you to not hold the line. I'm asking you to continue holding the line, but not because President Trump is infallible. He's not, and nobody is, but because the logic is sound. You cannot build a fortress of peace on a foundation of unresolved threats. You have to clear the ground first. That's what's happening. He's clearing the ground. The question you have to ask, the honest question, not the Tucker question, not the Marjorie question, the real question is this: could Donald Trump have achieved a permanent, lasting, America First posture, the real doctrine, the thing we all voted for, without first clearing the board of the existential threats that previous administrations allowed to metastasize for decades? The answer is no, absolutely no. And everybody who is being honest with themselves knows darn well that it's a no. He goes on to say, let me take you through it because the details matter. They always matter with President Trump. He doesn't do anything by accident. People think he's impulsive. The media loves the narrative. Trump is impulsive. Trump is chaotic. But look at the timeline. Look at how this actually played out. And we begin with Venezuela, the Western Hemisphere first. President Trump didn't wake up one morning and just decide to grab Maduro. It was months in the making, years actually, if you go back to his first term, when the Justice Department indicted Maduro on narco-terrorism charges in March of 2020. Nobody did anything about it then. The indictment just sat there. Biden recognized the opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez as the legitimate president after the stolen 2024 election, and then did absolutely nothing about it. Nothing. Just a statement. Trump came back and started squeezing. He designated Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization on day one. He designated the Cartel of the Suns, which Maduro basically ran, as the foreign terrorist organization in July. He started the maritime blockade of sanctioned oil tankers in December of 2025, and the whole time, by the way, he was offering Maduro off-ramps, multiple off-ramps. Rubio was negotiating. There were back channels through Qatar. The Rodriguez siblings, Delcy and Jorge, were apparently trying to work out a deal where Maduro would go into exile. But Maduro wouldn't go. He thought he could wait it out. He was wrong. January 2nd, 2026, the operation launched. Special Forces went in undercover at night. Army Warrant Officer 5 Eric Slover flew the lead Chinook into Maduro's military fortress. 83 people died, including the 32 Cuban soldiers who were stationed there. And by the way, what were Cuban soldiers doing in Venezuela? Think about that. Cuban soldiers protecting a Venezuelan dictator? That tells you everything about the network that had to be broken. Maduro is now in federal custody in New York. Delcy Rodriguez is the interim president, cooperating with our government. We're marketing Venezuelan oil on global markets. The largest proven oil reserves on the planet, 300 billion barrels, bigger than Saudi Arabia. They're no longer being used to fund narco-terrorism and Cuban communism. They're being used to benefit the American people and the Venezuelan people. Now, was that regime change? Technically, yes. But here's the critical difference, and this is what separates what President Trump did from what Bush did in Iraq, what Obama did in Libya, what the whole rotten establishment has done for 25 years. President Trump did not invade Venezuela. He did not send 150,000 troops. He did not dissolve the Venezuelan state. He did not fire every government employee and disband the security forces like Paul Bremer did in Iraq, which was the single stupidest decision in the history of American policy, by the way. The single stupidest decision. He created ISIS. He created the entire insurgency because they took 1 million armed, trained men and humiliated them and set them loose with nothing to do but fight. President Trump did the opposite. He took the head, left the body, made a deal with the body. That's not nation building. That's not a forever war. That's a surgical correction of a threat that had been allowed to fester for over 2 decades. Get in, remove the problem, arrange the pieces, get out. The Venezuelan state is still functioning. The military is still intact. The oil is flowing, and America is no longer dealing with a hostile narco state in its own backyard. We're not building schools in Caracas. We're not training a Venezuelan national police force. We're not spending $1 trillion over 10 years trying to turn Venezuela into Vermont. We're leaving. This is the doctrine. But you can't leave a problem you haven't solved. Now let's move to Iran. Literally a nuclear sword. Iran is the harder case. And he writes, I'll be straight with you. It's the one that bothers people the most. And he says, I understand why. Because Iran looks like exactly what we said we wouldn't do. It looks like Iraq in 2003. It looks like the neocons got what they always wanted. John Bolton is happy. Bill Kristol is happy. When John Bolton and Bill Kristol are happy about something you did, you should be nervous. He says, I get that. But Iran is not Iraq, and here is why. Iraq in 2003 was a contained threat. Saddam didn't have weapons of mass destruction. The intelligence was either wrong or fabricated. The threat was manufactured to justify a war that certain people in Washington wanted for ideological reasons that had nothing to do with American security. The entire premise was a lie. Iran in 2025 and 2026 was an uncontained, accelerating existential threat. This is not debatable. After Biden let the JCPOA collapse without replacing it with anything, because Biden couldn't negotiate his way out of a parking garage, Iran was enriching uranium to near weapon grade levels. The IAEA confirmed it. 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. They were, by every credible estimate, within weeks of breakout capability. Understand that. They were within weeks of breakout capability. The regime was simultaneously funding Hamas, which carried out October 7th, the worst massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust, funding Hezbollah, funding the Houthis, who were attacking global shipping in the Red Sea, and funding proxy wars across the entire Middle East. President Trump tried diplomacy first. And this is the part that everyone who's screaming betrayal conveniently forgets. He wrote a letter to Khamenei in March of 2025 offering negotiations. He sent Steve Witkoff to Oman for multiple rounds of talks. 5 rounds of talks. 5. Khamenei wouldn't take the deal. They were offered sanctions relief, normalization, the whole package, in exchange for dismantling the nuclear program. They said no. They kept enriching. So in June of 2025, during the 12-day war with Israel, President Trump sent B-2 bombers, 7 of them, flying 18 hours straight from Missouri, and dropped bunker buster bombs on Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, the 3 main enrichment sites, obliterated. It set their program back years. And then he said, now is the time for peace. And what did Iran do? They tried to rebuild. They kicked out the IAEA inspectors. They refused to let anyone verify what happened to their uranium stockpiles. They kept developing missiles. The regime, Khamenei specifically, made the calculation that he could outlast Trump, rebuild the program, and eventually get the bomb anyway. That calculation ended on February 28th, 2026, when a precision strike killed Khamenei at his own residence during a meeting of senior officials. Gone the defense minister, gone the IRGC commander, gone the secretary of the Security Council, all gone. 48 senior leaders taken out, according to President Trump. And in the streets of Tehran, this is the part the media will not show us. People were celebrating. People were dancing. They were cheering because the Iranian people had been hostages of this regime since 1979, and they know exactly what it is. The cost of war is horrific, and anyone who pretends there's a way to do this without innocent people dying is lying to you. This president didn't lie about it. He said in his own address, the lives of courageous American heroes may be lost, and we may have casualties, and that often happens in war. He's telling us the truth. The question isn't whether people will die. People were already dying under the regime. In the protests, the regime crushed by killing over 7,000 people in January alone. The question is whether the outcome justifies the cost, and the outcome, the permanent elimination of the Iranian nuclear threat, the destruction of the world's #1 state sponsor of terror, the destruction of the world's terrorist organizations, and the liberation of 88 million people from a medieval theocracy. it's worth it. It has to be, because the alternative was a nuclear-armed Iran, and a nuclear-armed Iran means the end of everything. Everything for a peaceful world. And then we segue to Cuba. Gravity does the work. Cuba is the proof that the doctrine works, even when you don't fire a shot. Nobody invaded Cuba. Nobody bombed Havana. President Trump simply cut the lifeline. When Maduro fell, the Venezuelan oil that kept Cuba alive, it disappeared. When President Trump signed the executive order on January 29th, threatening tariffs on any country that sells oil to Cuba, Mexico, which supplied 44% of Cuba's oil, suspended shipments. Russia called the situation truly critical, but hasn't sent a tanker. China made sympathetic noises, but hasn't delivered fuel. And now Cuba is collapsing under its own weight. 89% of families live in extreme poverty in Cuba. Did you hear that number? 89% of families live in extreme poverty in Cuba. Their schools suspended, hospitals losing power, airlines canceling flights because there's no jet fuel. The regime can't even run garbage trucks. This is what 67 years of communism looks like when nobody's willing to subsidize it anymore. President Trump's approach: make a deal before it's too late. He's talking to people inside the Cuban system, including reportedly Raul Castro's grandson, Rubio, who understands Cuba better than anyone in government, is leading the effort. The terms haven't been made public, but the logic is obvious. Open the economy, release political prisoners, hold elections, or watch the lights go out for good. No Marines, no occupation, just leverage, applied from a position of absolute economic dominance, and the patience to let gravity do what gravity does. So here is where it all comes together. Here is the part where you have to step back and look at the board, the whole board, not just the square that we're standing on. Before January of 2025, the Western Hemisphere contained a hostile narco state with the world's largest oil reserves, a communist holdout that served as a forward base for Russian and Chinese influence just 90 miles from Florida, and a Middle Eastern theocracy with an active nuclear weapons program that was funding terror organizations across 3 continents. These were not theoretical threats. They were active, operational, escalating threats that any future president of either party would have to have had dealt with eventually. The question was never whether to deal with them. The question was always how. And the 25-year answer from the foreign policy establishment: sanctions that didn't work, diplomacy that got played, nation building that wasted trillions of dollars, forever wars that killed thousands, had been tried and had failed catastrophically. Iraq proved it. Afghanistan proved it. Libya proved it. When President Trump, what he has done in 60 days, Maduro captured, Khomeini killed, Cuba strangled into negotiation. It's not a betrayal of America First doctrine. It is the precondition for the doctrine. It is the thing that has to happen once so that it never has to happen again. Think of it this way. If you inherit a house with a flooded basement, a collapsing roof, and a gas leak, you don't get to say, I'm a low-maintenance homeowner, and sit on the porch. You have to fix the emergencies first. Rip out the pipes, replace the roof, seal the gas line. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it's messy. People are going to say, I thought you said this would be a quiet house. And you say, it will be, after I fix the things that are about to kill us. That's what the second term of President Trump has been. Emergency triage on a world that handed this to our president in a state of active decay. Not by accident, not by fate, but by the deliberate incompetence of everyone who came before. The Trump doctrine, the real permanent version, is still coming, and it will look exactly like what we voted for. No permanent troop deployments in Caracas, no American military governor in Tehran, no nation building, no democracy exporting, no trillion-dollar reconstruction funds. Get in, fix the emergency, arrange cooperative locos to run things in a direction that doesn't threaten America, and then get out. Venezuela is already on that track. The oil deal was signed within days of Maduro's capture. Delcy Rodriguez is cooperating. American companies are investing. The troops are not staying. Iran is going to be harder, and it's going to take longer. There's active combat right now, and there will be loss possibly in our military. There will be loss and maybe more loss. The president himself said so. But the objective is not to occupy Iran. The objective is to break the regime's capacity to threaten the United States and its allies, support whatever transition the Iranian people choose, and they're already in the streets. They've been in the streets since December, and then leave. This is not Afghanistan. There will not be 20 years of patrols in Isfahan. There will not be a democratic transition monitored by USAID consultants who've never been outside the green zone. There will be a broken regime, a liberated population, and an American exit. Cuba will fold without a single American boot on the ground. It's already happening. And when it's done, when the threats that took decades to build have been eliminated, in months, the doctrine will take hold. Not as a slogan on a hat, not as a campaign promise that sounds good in a rally and dissolves on contact with reality, but as an actual operational strategic posture that future presidents will inherit and maintain because the conditions that required intervention no longer exist. No Iranian nuclear program to contain, no Venezuelan narco pipeline to interdict, no Cuban forward base to monitor, no justification for the next generation of neocons to drag us in to the next Iraq. That is the vision. That's what the second term of President Trump is building inward and toward. And I know it's painful right now. I know that there will be families that may grieve as a result of this that is happening. I know more will grieve possibly before this is over. And I know it looks from the outside like everything we were promised has been broken. But I'm asking you, he says in this article, to hold the line. Not because the president is infallible. He's not. Nobody is. But because the logic is sound. You cannot build a fortress of peace on a foundation of unresolved threats. You have to clear the ground first. That's what's happening. Yes, it can be ugly. Yes, it can be costly. And it was never going to look the way anyone wanted it to look. But the house will be clean. And when we maintain it, and then finally, for the first time in a generation, we stop sending our kids to die in countries that hate us. That is the Trump doctrine. Not the opening act, the final destination. And guess what, guys? We are almost there. I hope this has helped you to understand a little bit better. I know it has me. What President Trump has been doing. And now we have a very clear roadmap and understanding and able to connect the dots because of this article. And once again, I do thank Applelamps. Look for him or her. I really don't know them personally, but look for that account in Substack and or X. Anyway, that's it for now. Hope it helped. I look forward to being with you next time. This is Nancy with Seeking Truth Always, and I'll just say bye for now.